ladies and gentlemen. As I told you at the beginning of this trial, Denzel Suitt is innocent. He didn't commit an act of theft, and he most certainly did not commit an act of official misconduct in March of 2018. Let me say this a different way. Denzel Suitt took absolutely nothing from Jermaine Hobbs that day, and not a single piece of evidence, competent evidence, has told you otherwise. The evidence in this case, or the lack of evidence, has proven that things didn't happen as the state told you in their opening. The evidence has proven that Denzel didn't take Jermaine Hobbs' money, but you need not go nearly that far in order to find Denzel not guilty. The evidence need not prove Denzel's innocence in order to find him not guilty. It need not convince you of what happened in March, before you acquit Denzel. That's because in this country, we're all protected by some very important legal principles that form the heart and soul of our judicial system. Before we go into the evidence and look a little more closely, and I promise you we will, I'd like to take a moment to discuss a few of those important legal principles with you. Now, the judge, as he indicated to you, is going to talk to you after myself and Ms. Kruathamer are done about the law before you begin your deliberations. But again, as I told you in my opening, there's a couple principles that are so important that it would be neglectful of me to not discuss them with you while I have an opportunity to speak with you. These principles protect us all as American citizens. They protect each and every one of us should we find ourselves in Denzel's situation. An innocent man wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit. The first of those, and I know I talked about this before and probably have heard it a few times, is the presumption of innocence. Again, what's the presumption of innocence? In criminal trials, the party accused of a crime, the defendant, is entitled to the benefit of the legal presumption in favor of innocence. The law tells us that persons charged with a crime are innocent until they're proved by competent evidence to be guilty. It is a rule of criminal law that the guilt of the accused must be fully proved. You are not to convict him on suspicion, even on a strong suspicion. There must be a strong conviction in your minds when you get into that jury room that Denzel is guilty of the two offenses he's charged with. That presumption stands as Denzel's protection unless it has been removed, and it hasn't, by the evidence proving his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Before being sworn in as jurors, each of you agreed to honor this principle. By doing so, you agreed to view Denzel as an innocent man at the outset of this case. You agreed to continue to hold this view as you listen to the evidence in this case. As you listen to these final arguments, you must continue to presume that he is innocent. You must do this as you hold this state to a standard required by the laws of our country. We'll get to that standard in a moment. But the second important principle is the burden of proof. In our criminal justice system, the burden of proof lies with the state. We don't require any person, in this case Denzel, to prove their innocence. Our system recognizes that an innocent person may not have much to offer about an incident that they had nothing to do with. Our system insists that before the state can take a person's liberty, it must bear the entire burden of proving the case and the accusations against that person. That means that if you, ladies and gentlemen, when you get into the jury room, have any questions about what took place in March of 2018, you can't look to Denzel for any answers. It was the responsibility of the state to prove and answer those questions for you. And the state's failure to do that in this case can be the sole basis of your not guilty verdict. The third and most important legal principle, I would say, that I'd like to discuss with you here is beyond a reasonable doubt. I know I gave you a definition in my opening, but definitions are definitions. I've found over the years that the best way to kind of explain what beyond a reasonable doubt is to give examples of what's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So for instance, if you get into the jury room and you think that Denzel might have committed the acts of theft and official misconduct, you have to return a verdict of not guilty. If you think it's likely he committed the crimes, it's still a verdict of not guilty. If you think that Denzel probably committed the crime, again, still not enough. The verdict has to be not guilty. Even if you're fairly certain that Denzel committed the acts of theft and official misconduct, that's not beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to return a verdict of not guilty. Beyond a reasonable doubt, as you probably can tell, is a high standard. A standard that is such that you find that there's no other logical explanation that can be derived from the state's facts and evidence in this case except that Denzel committed theft and official misconduct. Ladies and gentlemen, you only need one reason to doubt, and you have to return a verdict of not guilty. In this case, I submit to you, there's many reasons to doubt. This case is filled with doubt. Let's talk about those reasons for a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard from, I believe it was 7 witnesses of the state. We started with Sergeant Torres, or excuse me, I believe it's Sergeant Roldan at this point, the Internal Affairs Sergeant. And Sergeant Roldan testified about a number of things, about what was told to her, how her investigation went, what she pulled and didn't pull. And ladies and gentlemen, some of what Sergeant Roldan told you, and some of the important parts, is what she wasn't able to say. As she said, Sergeant Roldan was a detective, was an officer in the South District. It was common knowledge that there were cameras at the end of Bayview Terrace. As a matter of fact, you heard that repetitively. Not only from the officers, but from Mr. Palms and his brother. But yet, they'd like you to believe that Denzel Suitt went to the end of Bayview Terrace, right in front of two cameras that we saw, and took money. Everyone that testified knew those cameras was there. From Osorio to Sergeant Roldan, to the two gentlemen that testified for the stand. But yet we're supposed to believe that this happened the way that Mr. Palms told us. Now, what else did Sergeant Osorio tell us? She told us that the description that was presented to her in the beginning of this case was two Hispanic males. Now, I didn't ask Officer Osorio, but I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, and use your own recollection, that he was clearly a Hispanic man. I asked Officer Osorio what if she knows the race of Denzel Suitt. Black man. So when we started with this whole thing, when this started at Internal Affairs, we started with a description that wasn't even right. That's where this all began. And that's just the beginning of a comedy of errors, how we get to where we are here today. So the next thing that Sergeant Roldan talked about was these log sheets. And I know you ladies and gentlemen saw them, and you'll have them in the jury room. And Sergeant Roldan didn't want to say that it's the normal course that a passenger fills these log sheets out or makes the calls. It is, but she didn't want to tell you that, but it doesn't matter because Officer Osorio gets on the stand and tells you that that night whose responsibility was it? His. Who didn't put the call on the log sheet? Him. Who didn't call it in? Osorio. Did Denzel have any knowledge of this or know about it? He point blank said, no, I did it myself. As a matter of fact, and we'll get to him in a second, but I submit to you, he had absolutely, positively no recollection of this interaction with these two guys other than referring to his reports. That's how much this stuck in his mind. He went to Internal Affairs, he told you he couldn't speak about it. They had to refer to things and get him to say it. He told you that. He got on the stand. He couldn't give you a single fact without looking at his report. He remembered pulling over some other car. But this incident stood out so much in his mind that he had no recollection. Well, let's get back to Sergeant Roldan for a second. And I just want to show you, ladies and gentlemen, one thing. We're going to show this video 2 times during this closing, but I wanted to pull it up now. Just for, I hope I don't mess it up. If I do, I'll apologize. Okay. So once that HDMI sign moves to the top, ladies and gentlemen, we talked about March 25th after midnight. We heard from the aunt, and we'll talk about her in a second, but that she gave Mr. Palms the money on March 24th in the afternoon or early evening hours. And you heard me asking the questions of these witnesses. It's plain as day that this says March 24th, 2009. It's plain as day that Sergeant Roldan got on the stand and said she talked with the guy at Domino's, it's 1 hour off. Well, 12:50 turning to 1300 is 1 in the afternoon on March 24th. Look, it looks like it's nighttime. It may be. Is it March 24th? Is it March 25th? Mr. Palms' brother told you it was March 24th. That's right. So this is the day before everybody's talking about that they're at Domino's. I don't know. But the officer in charge of this internal affairs investigation cared so much about it that she didn't even figure out the right time, or it is March 24th. Don't know. She told you it was 1 hour. Clearly that's wrong. Now, I don't want to talk too much more about Sergeant Roldan because, quite frankly, the case boils down to Mr. Palms. And we all remember Mr. Palms taking the stand and the things he testified to. Now, Mr. Palms started his story on the day before going to his aunt's house, or at least that afternoon. And he told you, ladies and gentlemen, that he went there to get $600. And he told you that his girlfriend, who we didn't hear from, signed this promissory note. And I had him go into it. It says, I, Kenyatta Brown, will be paying back Diane Johnson $500 on Friday, April 6th. Mr. Palms told you that's the note he signed on March 24th. Then he told us that sometime after this incident took place, because his aunt, who said she couldn't remember if she lost it or not, but we have both, they signed another promissory note. Now, I don't know who signed it. Mr. Palms told you that that's his signature. He told you that even though the date says March 24th, that it came sometime after this incident on Bayview Terrace. So all of a sudden, we've gone from owing $500 because of the odd jobs that he did, to something created after that says $600 again. Why? Well, because we get to the bank account. And Miss Johnson told you this is her bank account. I'm not sure how clear it is, but you can see, and you'll have it with you if it's not that clear. On March 24th, as Miss Johnson told you, she went to the bank and took out $500. It says March 26th, but if you read it, we're next to Bank of America, it says ATM March 24th. Then, on March 28th, Miss Johnson couldn't remember the date, but March 28th, she deposited $600. Well, why is that important? Well, Mr. Palms told you multiple times that he only owed $500. He did the work, remember? The odd jobs. That's why he had the loose money and whatever else he was talking about. If he owed $500, why did he create a second promissory note for $600 and pay back $600? Well, it just adds to his whole story, right? Because none of it really makes that much sense. So after the promissory note conversation, we get to Bayview Terrace. And what's important about Bayview Terrace? Mr. Palms gets up on the stand and on direct examination says he knows that Denzel took that money. Well, as we got through all of that, we know that he doesn't really know that he took his money. He's assuming that he did. Even giving Mr. Palms that everything that took place the way he said. He claims that he's sitting in a car with his brother, that these officers pull up, no lights on, and they get out of the car. The lights never go on, according to him. On the Bayview Terrace, they get out of the car. One gentleman approaches his brother, one gentleman approaches him. He says the guy that approaches him is my client, Mr. Suitt, right? And he says they're standing next to each other about 2 arm lengths apart. And he says he sees him take the wallet off the roof of the car, and Denzel takes 2 steps back. I don't know if you remember, I certainly do. It was interesting, to me at least. We stood here by this jury box, and I started right next to him, 2 lengths apart. I apologize for getting so close to him. And I took 2 steps back, as he said, and I had him look at Miss Kruathamer. And then I asked him, well, what's going on? He said, well, I don't know. You're behind me, or I can't see. Your lawyer tricks, I think he said, or something along those lines. And then he talked about his sixth sense, or his spidey sense, or whatever the heck he said, that he knew. He didn't know. He had no idea. He couldn't see anything. I don't know whether he lost the money. I don't know whether he dropped it. I don't know whether it fell out when he was showing his brother and bragging about how much money he had, despite the fact that he had just borrowed it from his aunt. I can tell you for certain Denzel didn't take it. Then we get even further. He wants to show everybody his new wallet, right? By the way, where's the old wallet? I've never heard any conversation about that. Did he lose that too? You know, his brother says he didn't, but he had 15 shots. Told you he needed a half gallon to get drunk. A lot of alcohol. But anyway, he shows us the wallet. He wants to show everybody. He showed Miss Kruathamer, took it all out. Then when I asked him about the credit cards, if you ladies and gentlemen remember. He took them all out. He said, they weren't like this. Stuffed the money in there, showed it to us, and then said, see, nothing falls out. And he dumped it. What happened? The money didn't fall out. He was right about that. The stuff fell out. right here on the witness stand. After he told us nothing would fall out. I don't know if it fell out, nor do you, ladies and gentlemen. But that's reasonable doubt. That's the point. So, ladies and gentlemen, he doesn't know. That's the answer to this whole case. But it doesn't just end there. We have a conversation with himself and his brother. We know they have a criminal record. We know they've had problems with the Jersey City police. I think his brother was on probation for arson, of all things. But on top of everything you heard, think about the attitude. Think about how he answered Ms. Kruathamer's questions. Polite, pleasant, looking at me, ladies and gentlemen. I couldn't even get him to answer a simple question, yes or no. The judge had to instruct him multiple times to just answer the question. You think that on that night, Bayview Terrace, he was the nicest guy in the world? He got cut a break. His brother got cut a break. You heard about the summonses they could have been issued. They weren't. Nothing happened. South District's a busy area. I know Ms. Kruathamer pointed out there were only 5 calls for this particular car. South District's a busy area. Greenville Section's a busy area. You heard the detective, Doug Peretti, talk about that. And I know this probably doesn't matter in your deliberations, but it stuck out to me. The conversation about parking in front of the fire hydrant. This is a guy with no license, claiming he's going to New York the next day. He's worried about this money. He's worried about his girlfriend's car. Yet, on a street where there's other spots, he decides, I'm going to park in front of the fire hydrant. Don't you think this draws attention? Don't you think that on a routine patrol, as you heard everybody say that is in the South District, that somebody's going to pull up on them and have a conversation about the car parked in front of the fire hydrant with 2 guys sitting in it drinking alcohol? He didn't care. He was indignant about it. He told you, man, I just did it. You know, it's things as simple, ladies and gentlemen, and again, does this mean anything? Maybe, maybe not. When Ms. Kruathamer asked him about his daughter, who he was taking up because he had custody, he said he was taking his daughter and I believe the son of his girlfriend up to New York. I asked him where they were going to sit in the car because he told us all this stuff in the car, and then it was, no, I'm not taking the car. Another day, I meant this, I meant that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he wasn't truthful. He was trying to make the story fit. Why do you think he could give you such detail about the roads he drove, about the pants he had on? But when I asked him simply, what shirt were you wearing? Oh, I don't know. It's because he read his transcripts. He prepared with the prosecutor as they told you. That was his story. He was going to tell it. And when things didn't fit, he was going to yell and scream and get angry and not answer my questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, what does all this mean? Well, again, I'm not 100% sure. But we move on to Domino's. I'm going to go back to that video that I was showing you earlier and let it play for a couple of minutes. Maybe. So here we're back to where I showed you before on March 24th at 12:50, according to the camera. And that's the white car that the gentleman told you in. And we're going to see Mr. Pumps. And I ask that you watch it. Are those the actions of somebody who was sure that his money got taken? Earlier on Bayview Terrace, he's searching his jacket, searching the car, he's looking on the floor. He wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Denzel took his money. Can you? But it doesn't just end there, right? We start to get these calls into dispatch. We get calls into the South District and a stop there. We get an approach to a police car. And what's important about that? Well, it's not necessarily Mr. Palms, right? But it's his brother who he's been having this conversation with throughout the night. And here, apparently, according to them, he tells them that my money's gone. So his brother goes and approaches a police car when they get back to the area. Now, mind you, as I asked him, they never went back to Bayview Terrace to look for the money, make sure it didn't fall on the ground. They never backtracked anything other than he said, Mr. Palms said he was going to backtrack in his mind, I think he said. But he never went anywhere to look for this money, other than all over this car at Domino's. The floor, his jacket, talking to his brother, everywhere else. So his brother approaches the police car, and what happens? Tries to tell him, as you heard Officer No tell him. And then what happens? He says, I forget about it. And he leaves. So that's one time he says, forget about it. Then he heard from Sergeant Brett. And what did he tell him? He told you that he called dispatch, being Mr. Davis, and said, it was a misunderstanding. I ask that you remember what Mr. Palms is doing in the background of those calls. He's yelling and screaming, forget about it, don't call. Is that because he's angry, as they want you to believe? Or maybe he's just not sure. Maybe he's afraid he's going to get in trouble again for lying about money getting taken. I don't know. Again, reasonable doubt. So ladies and gentlemen, excuse me, what we have here is a situation where we have one gentleman, Mr. Palms, telling us a story that makes no sense. And flat out telling us, I never saw him take the money. We have another gentleman and his brother, who I'll give him some leeway based upon the amount of drinking he had been doing that day. He testified, he didn't even tell you he saw the wallet. He didn't even tell you anything about that interaction other than he saw his brother and the officer, didn't even identify Officer Suitt, said the officer face to face. And he said he could see it from the car. He told you that. If I take him at his word, he saw absolutely nothing, because I'm sure he would have told you. He told you, he spoke with Ms. Kruathamer a number of times, watched the videos. He wouldn't even allow that when he said he had bad eyes, that he really had bad eyes. He said it to Ms. Kruathamer. I asked him, he said he didn't. I showed him in the transcript where he said it to the police. He said it's not true. There's a lot not true. So I know I didn't run through all of the evidence. I probably talked too long, and I apologize. But this case, ladies and gentlemen, is clear as day. It's clear as day that the state can't prove anything. It's clear as day that this case is filled, as I told you, with reasonable doubt. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, we're going back, and this is going to be an easy deliberation. And that you're going to see the reasonable doubt that everyone else can see as we watch this. And for those reasons, your oath as jurors are going to require you to come back and return a verdict of not guilty. But just before I conclude, the state, I'm sure, is going to stand up and talk about circumstantial evidence. And they're going to tell you that because if you believe that Mr. Palms had the money and then didn't have the money, that's the same as the example the judge gave you about snow, if you remember. He said, if you're looking outside and you see it snows, and I'm paraphrasing, if I get it wrong, I apologize, that's direct evidence that it's snowing outside. And then he told you circumstantial evidence is, you go to bed at night, there's nothing on the cars, you wake up, there's white stuff on the cars, and again, I'm paraphrasing, that you knew it snowed the night before. And the state's going to tell you that that's this case, that this is circumstantial evidence. I'm going to give you a different example. Say we live here in Jersey City, and instead of being a cold day, which is not too bad, but a cold day like today and not snow, we're talking about the summertime. And we get home from our job, and we see there's a puddle in our driveway. We don't know where that puddle came from. But we look across the street and we see that the fire hydrant plug is off and it's dripping water. Then we look up and we see that where we parked our car, it looks like the car might be leaking from the air conditioner. And then we look up and we see that it looks like when I move the car that my window air conditioner unit is dripping down into that same spot, or it might be. The state's going to try to convince you that those are examples of circumstantial evidence. They're not. Those are the reasons, ladies and gentlemen, that the state can't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And those are the reasons that you should return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
When I first spoke to you all last week, 7 days ago, I talked to you a little bit about the oath that the defendant, Denzel Suitt, had to take when he was sworn in as a Jersey City police officer. His oath is much like the one that you guys took last week on Tuesday before you were released after we selected you. It's an essential part of the criminal justice system. Your power, through the oath that you took, gives you power limited to a pen and a paper. His type of power that comes from the oath he took, it equipped him with handcuffs, a gun, a radio, a uniform, a taxpayer-paid marked patrol unit. And we give him and other officers power like that so that when they get out of their cars and they ask people out of their cars, the right thing happens. That's what's supposed to happen. Jermaine Palms and Jonathan Davis have been screaming at the top of their lungs for 689 days. 689 days those men have been shouting for anybody to listen to them. To tell anybody who is willing to give them the time and the attention that what Denzel Suitt did on March 24th, midnight tour on Bayside Terrace in Greenville, Jersey City, New Jersey, did not go the way it was supposed to go. Instead, Jermaine Palms and Jonathan Davis have consistently and continuously stated what happened while Denzel Suitt was acting under the authority of his uniform under oath. They have consistently maintained that this man violated their rights. The defendant, as is his right, has denied their allegations, and you have all gotten to witness the actual blue wall of silence. All day yesterday, I called as witnesses his colleagues from the Jersey City Police Department South District. They banded together and circled the wagons to protect him. Not to protect the victim in this case, or his brother in this case, to protect him. It's often said that there are two sides to every story. And that may be, but this is not a story. This is life. This is Jermaine Palms' life. Jermaine Palms and his brother relentlessly tried to report the crime that happened to Jermaine Palms on the night of the incident in question. They have maintained that same determination and persistence for 689 days. What does it take for somebody who looks like Jermaine Palms, who sounds like Jermaine Palms, who looks like Jonathan Davis and sounds and talks like Jonathan Davis? What does it take for men like them to be taken seriously by the police in this city? To be taken seriously by members of their community, by the press, by the system, to not be treated with scorn and ridicule and disbelief. What does it take, and why are they treated like that? Why was a poor, black, middle-aged, broken-down man named Jermaine Palms and his older brother, Jonathan Davis, who for all intents and purposes is a functioning alcoholic, ridiculed and toyed with by the 911 operator when they first tried to report the crime, ignored by uniformed police officers who were maintaining a fixed post on Ocean Avenue that night, denied entry to the very same precinct in the same neighborhood where those two men were born and raised. They couldn't even get inside, ladies and gentlemen. Jonathan Davis and Jermaine Palms did everything right that night. They did everything that we as a society want victims of crimes to do. They immediately reported the crime to 911. They immediately told the 911 operator, or Jermaine told, Jonathan told the operator, my brother's been robbed, my brother's been robbed. He was searched by a police officer. They told the police over and over again, get the cameras, get the cameras, get the cameras. There are cameras there at the end of Bayside Terrace. Get the cameras. They were the only ones in this entire paradigm that didn't know those cameras weren't working. They told the police over and over again, just check the calls. And what they're talking about are the event logs that you guys saw. What they're talking about are the dispatch calls that you guys heard. They asked the police to do the right thing. There should have been proof that night of this stop. Ask yourselves why there was no proof. That stop happened. Officer Osorio confirmed it. The violation of rights, the violation of trust and human and professional decency that this man, this defendant, this police officer who took an oath committed during his midnight tour on March 24th into the 25th of 2018 against Jermaine Palms and his brother would have died that night on that isolated street. It would have disappeared just as quietly as it had began. No lights, no sirens, no radio, no dispatch, no event log, and no tickets. Had it not been for Jonathan Davis's insistence that his younger brother report it, and they reported it they did, and you heard how many times they tried to report it. Jonathan called 911. They went to fixed post officers. They went to the South District. They had to wait for a shift change in order to be taken seriously, to find out the number and the address to the Jersey City Police Department Internal Affairs. And finally, they came to my office and met with the detectives in my office, where they told the same story, under oath, just like they did here. Jermaine Palms went to grand jury and told the same story. If he was making it up, why would he go through all that trouble? You have had ample opportunity to hear from all of my witnesses. You saw both Mr. Palms and Jonathan Davis testify before you. Having witnessed their demeanor and watched them on the stand and watched them interact with me and with Mr. Hirschorn, ask yourselves, throughout this ordeal that they have been living with for 689 days, why were they treated with such indignity that night? With such neglect and disrespect by the same police officers who came in here yesterday afternoon? Each one of them told you what his duties and responsibilities are as sworn officers of the law, to protect and serve members of the public. Well, aren't those two men, Jermaine Palms and Jonathan Davis, members of the public? Don't they deserve respect and a chance to be heard? Why is it that when those two men came forward with an allegation against one of their colleagues, this defendant, why is it that Jonathan Davis and Jermaine Palms were ignored? And were literally told by a Jersey City police officer in the South District, prove it. Why has it been so hard for Jermaine Palms to get justice in Jersey City? Why did he have to wait for a shift to change? I submit to you that each and every one of you, 14 people, know exactly why they were treated that way. And it's the very same reason that Denzel Suitt, while in his city-issued uniform and his taxpayer-funded patrol car, targeted them, targeted Jermaine Palms, targeted Jonathan Davis on March 24th, 2018. during the midnight tour. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were parked on a dead-end street with no traffic in front of a fire hydrant. Denzel Suitt found those two men on Bayside Terrace, a street known to him and other seasoned officers for petty crimes. You heard about that from the officers. A desolate street in one of Jersey City's poorest and most neglected sections of this city. So neglected that CCTV cameras at that dead-end street are not repaired. They've been out for God knows how long, according to the testimony that we heard. Denzel Suitt found two middle-aged black men, palms, disabled, and driving with no license, who testified that based on his life experiences, he felt wary enough to tell Officer Suitt when confronted, "I ain't got no drugs on me, I just got some money." And Jonathan Davis, as I said, is basically a functioning alcoholic who admits to drinking more than any human being should drink, particularly if he suffers from the illnesses that he described that he suffers with. Both of these pathetic, broken men were inside of a car that they didn't own, in front of a fire hydrant with open alcohol bottles on a public street. Both told you that they had criminal histories, criminal convictions. They were forthcoming about that. They didn't lie. They didn't try to sugarcoat it. They told you about the way that they were approached and dealt with. And you heard from Kevin Osorio that the way that they handled those two men, he and his partner, was inconsistent with Jersey City Police protocols. You heard that the men were asked out of the car and they were made to put their hands on the car. Is that inconsistent, or is that consistent with police protocol in this kind of a situation? It's inconsistent, ma'am. Where did they put their belongings? On top of the roof. Is that consistent or inconsistent? Inconsistent, ma'am. Jonathan Davis and Jermaine Palms are who they are. I don't get to pick who victims are. You don't get to pick who victims are. Mr. Hirschorn doesn't get to pick who the victims are. Who got to pick who the victims were that night? Denzel Suitt did. It's Jonathan Davis's and Jermaine Palms' very lack of sophistication that they clearly exhibited on the stand before you. Their lack of money, their lack of education, their lack of resources that made them the perfect targets for this kind of crime. Denzel Suitt took a gamble on the night of March 24th into March 25th. We know what night it took place on. There's no question when this took place. Denzel Suitt figured that two men with criminal convictions who spoke like that, dressed like that, talked like that, would just roll over and take it. He figured they wouldn't fight back and they wouldn't pursue it. Why would they? Men like them? You heard from the police officers yesterday that when those two men did pursue it, you heard what happened. And exactly, it's not surprising what happened given this context. Officer No and Sergeant Peretti both told you what they did in response when Officer No actually met Jermaine Palms' brother on Ocean Avenue. He told you he didn't even bother to get the guy's name. He didn't even bother to get his brother's name, the victim of the crime he was being told about. He didn't bother to get any contact information. He did nothing. He didn't write it down on an event log, and we know from the testimony that's a requirement. He did nothing. Why? Why was this man not taken seriously? Sergeant Peretti never even met either one of those men. And you heard the dispatch call. How did it start out? When he called dispatch back, having never, ever even met, not once, met Jermaine Palms or Jonathan Davis. He called him a moron. Who does that? Who does that? Why would you do that?
Southwest. Hey, what's up? That guy Jonathan, did that whole thing with big long ocean. Just in the ticket, I don't know if you did, he closed it out or not, but in the ticket, put it in there that, he said it was a misunderstanding, spell it out just in case he decides to call tomorrow.
All right, yeah, I'll go back and
Yeah, just put the whole explanation in that he said, not just advised or whatever it is, because I would rather have more on the ticket than less. Just in case this moron comes back tomorrow and says, we stole, the Rockefeller worked from him.
Yeah.
Rather not hear that crap.
Yeah, no, definitely, all right. I'll add that.
Appreciate it, pal. Thank you.
You heard that call. You know that I asked Sergeant Peretti, did you ever meet with the complainant or his brothers? No, I did not. And how are you going to tell the dispatcher that it was all a misunderstanding? Where did that come from? Nobody told him that. He didn't even, Officer Note said that was never said to him. Where did the idea that the victim in this case and his brother said it was a misunderstanding? That was never, it's a lie. It doesn't exist in this case. The deck was stacked against Jermaine Palms and his brother, obviously. You can see it. It's like dominoes, one on top of the other, except for they're blue. It's a blue stack of dominoes. There's no documentation, audio or written, of the crime that happened. None of the other police officers on Ocean Avenue documented coming into contact with him until they had to, at the direction of Internal Affairs. The police did not believe these men. They did not want to hear from these men. They did not want to help these men. You heard their testimony, and testimony is important. Testimony is evidence. Officer No specifically told you that his duties and responsibilities as a sworn law enforcement officer are to serve and protect the public. As I said, did he serve and protect the public when he just let Jonathan Davis walk away northbound on Ocean? Was he serving and protecting members of the public when he didn't get any of Jonathan Davis's contact information? Was Sergeant Peretti, a supervising officer, serving and protecting the public when he didn't bother to find out any of Jonathan Davis's information? When he called Jonathan Davis a moron and said it was all a misunderstanding? Was he serving the public good? Each officer that Jermaine Palms and Jonathan Davis have come into contact with, up until the point that they got to Sergeant Torres at Internal Affairs at Jersey City Police Department, because she actually listened, whether it was on the phone, in person, started and treated with these men from a place of no. No, we're not interested in hearing what you have to say. No, you are not coming past this other door in South District. Those police officers have done everything in their power to shut that complaint down, including Kevin Sorio, that man's partner. He came in here and he couldn't remember anything. If you recall, I had given him a transcript of the statement that he gave to my office. And I asked him some questions, and he told us some of the things that had happened that night. That the stop did in fact happen. That he did come across these two middle-aged black men in this white four-door car. He went to the passenger side, that guy went to the driver's side. Property was put on top of the roof. There were open bottles in the car. There were a ton of clothes in the back of the car, and he thought the men were homeless. Keep that in mind when you ask yourselves why these men were treated the way that they were. Don't reject your own judgment when you're analyzing this case. Don't reject your own judgment when you're analyzing the actions that all of these officers took that night. Look to the elements of the offenses, the two offenses that this man has been charged with. The first one is official misconduct. There's no question that Denzel Suitt is a public official. He's a public servant. He's hired, he has a job, he accepts a paycheck to serve the public. Here, we have testimony from Sergeant, now Roldan, that her investigation into Mr. Palms' complaint led her to narrow down suspects to the male police officers who were working the South District midnight tour that night. After learning from Mr. Palms that the person who stole his $600 was chubby and Hispanic looking, and that from Mr. Davis, the partner was Hispanic looking with a thick mustache, the sergeant was able to narrow down her focus to that defendant and his partner. Now, Mr. Hirschorn talked a little bit about, well, there was testimony that that guy's black, right? The defendant is black. I'm going to go a little off script here because I guarantee you, the 14 of you, if I ask you, have no idea what I am, right? I could be anything. I get everything. I don't speak fluent Spanish. I'm not Spanish. But for the last 15 years when I come to this building, every day somebody comes up to me speaking Spanish. I'm not Spanish. We also got corroborative testimony from Kevin Osorio. He told you, as I indicated earlier, that they were both on patrol together, operating a marked vehicle that night. But the second element of official misconduct, that Denzel Suitt committed an act relating to his office, knowing that that act was unauthorized. An act here means one relating to his office and that it was done in an unauthorized manner, meaning it was a breach of a prescribed duty of the public servant's office. Well, we all know what act that is. That there must be a clear duty to deprive another of a benefit. What can I say, what can I do to convince the 14 of you that Jermaine Palms and Jonathan Davis reported what actually happened that night? That it was fact, not fiction. That the $600 that he borrowed from his aunt that night was stolen by a police officer in the South District and not lost. I ask you to look to the corroboration in the evidence that I have presented to you. Meaning, I'm asking you to look at the evidence that is before you, to confirm who testified about the events that night and the hours after, and analyze the testimony to determine whether or not the people who took that stand were telling you the truth, or did they have a motive to lie. If Mr. Palms had simply lost the $600, as the defense would have you believe, does it make sense that Jermaine Palms, who's been to state prison and actually told you that he is trying to get out of Jersey City, that his first reaction would be, I may have misplaced it. I think I'm going to call the cops and pin it on a cop. That doesn't make sense. When you lose something and you search for it, your reasonable next thought is not going to be, who can I blame for this? You're going to look for it. You're going to search for it. And you have the Domino's video. Jermaine Palms never got out of the car again after he got pulled out by that guy. You heard that. The only time he got it, he went from East Orange to his girlfriend's, and then he drove to Boyd Avenue, where he picked up his older brother. His older brother got in the car. I would disagree with Mr. Hirschorn. I don't think he was bragging about $600. I think I heard somebody sort of scoffing or laughing when he said that. It's not funny. That $600 meant everything to Jermaine Palms. That was his security deposit. He was trying to get out of Jersey City, and he could barely afford to do it. His retired aunt, out of the goodness of her heart, let him work off $100 and gave him another $500 so that he could pay the security deposit. It's not funny. He wasn't bragging. He showed it to his brother. Why was he at his brother's house? Because he was trying to spend his last night in New Jersey with his brother.
911, operator 767, what's the address of your emergency?
How do you want to? Hello?
911, what's the address?
Yeah, hey, sure. Listen, I was on Bill Well and
They saw far. I don't know if they got the rest or whatever has it. They searched me. My name is Jonathan Davis. They searched my brother, and the cop took money from my brother.
I said, so then why are you dialing 911? If the police searching you.
I want. I need a police thing or whatever. They took money from us, man.
Why are you calling 911? Really? That's an appropriate question to ask a caller who's telling you that he got robbed by a cop? Why are you calling that? Who else was he supposed to call? If he was going to make this story up, wouldn't it have been more helpful, an easier case to prove, if he told you that he actually saw Denzel Suitt take the $600? That in addition to stealing the $600, Denzel Suitt took the $70 he had in loose money from the $100 that he broke from his cousin after he did painting for her? That's called corroboration. Yes, in his frustration, in testifying before you, on cross-examination, when answering Mr. Hirschorn's questions, would submit to you, and Mr. Hirschorn was just doing his job, and I respect that and I understand that. But to Mr. Palms, here's another person who doesn't believe him, right? So in his frustration, he's talking about, or describing for all of you, how when he was asked to get out of the car, he's standing here facing his car on Bayside Terrace, and the defendant has his wallet. Well, why does the defendant have his wallet? He's already gotten Jermaine Palms' New Jersey identification. We know that guy knows Jermaine Palms doesn't have a valid driver's license, so why is he holding his wallet? In any case, on the witness stand, Jermaine Palms is sitting here, and Mr. Hirschorn is trying to get an understanding of how far the defendant was when he had Mr. Palms' wallet. Jermaine Palms got frustrated, and maybe it was humorous to some of you. It was certainly unexpected for me. And he explained that the defendant then took a step back, holding his wallet. And Mr. Hirschorn asked him, well, what am I doing now? And I hope that you all recall the testimony, and if you don't recall the testimony, we can always play it back for you. The point of doing that was because Mr. Palms was so certain that Denzel Suitt had taken his money out of his wallet, because he was the last person going through the wallet, right? So, while it may have seemed funny when Mr. Hirschorn said, how do you know he was in your wallet if you didn't see him in your wallet? Was it some kind of sixth sense or spidey sense? Maybe that was humorous to you. As I said, it was unexpected for me. But rather than using his spidey sense that night, would it not be more reasonable that Mr. Palms, already on high alert, on an isolated street, on a dead end in Greenville, being stalked by the cops, with the experiences in his life that he has had, would it not be more reasonable to think that maybe his five senses were on high alert? That maybe he sensed movement behind him after the defendant took a step back while holding his wallet? Is that not more reasonable to accept than, oh, well, Mr. Palms should be dismissed because he says he was using his spidey sense? That's the kind of dismissive behavior attitude that Mr. Palms has been treated with since day one. What constitutional right did Denzel Suitt have? What justification did he have in going in Mr. Palms' wallet that night? There's no allegation that there were any weapons present. There are no allegations that there was any drug use or possession that night. He already had, as I said, the identification. Why did he have Jermaine Palms' wallet in his hand? And why did he take a step back? After Jermaine Palms explained that he was then allowed at a certain point in time to get back in his car, he was asked by Mr. Hirschorn, look, you checked your wallet, didn't you? After you got back in the car, after he handed you back your wallet? And Mr. Palms said no. And that was met with some skepticism. But is it reasonable to really think that a man like Jermaine Palms, who although he has an old one, has a criminal history nonetheless, who's driving around in his girlfriend's car without a valid driver's license, with open bottles of alcohol in his car parked in front of a fire hydrant, isn't it more reasonable to believe that he breathed a sigh of relief and thought something like, damn, thank God. Thank God I didn't get arrested. Thank God they didn't call my girlfriend to come and get her car since I don't have a driver's license. Woo! And they didn't even pour out the alcohol. Give me one of those beers. Isn't that more reasonable? That's the world that Jermaine Palms lived in. Not, let me check my wallet for the $12.50s my aunt gave me for my security deposit because I think that cop might have stolen it from my wallet while he was holding it, and I don't know why he was holding it, but he might have been taking it out of my wallet from the credit card space. Jermaine Palms' story makes sense. The details that he provided to you are corroborated by pieces of evidence that have been sewn into this case from last week to today. After Jermaine Palms and his brother left Bayside Terrace, they both told you that they went to Communipaw Avenue. Not very far away. All of this happened in the South District. You have maps. You can use S46. I don't really want to get too much into this, but you'll have this in the jury room. They went to Domino's, and that's where I like to say the revelation happened. That's where you saw Jermaine Palms' brother go inside to order the pizza, and you see Mr. Palms start searching his pants, pockets, the floor of his car, the seat of the car, and basically the entire car, looking for something. What's he looking for? He's looking for the $600. So we know he's looking for something. That's not good acting, that's real life in that video. Denzel Suitt was the only other person on the face of this earth that had handled that wallet that night. There were two people that handled that wallet. Jermaine Palms and Denzel Suitt. Denzel Suitt would have you believe that unsophisticated, silly, frustrated Jermaine Palms lost the $600 that he had worked for, that he was looking forward to, that he had already made arrangements to use on a security deposit. That he just lost it. The same $600 that he got up here and he showed you how carefully he folded it after he got it from Aunt Diane, how carefully he stuffed it down into the credit card slot in his wallet. No, he didn't have the wallet today in court, or last week in court. But he had it on March 24th into the 25th, and that's what matters. He showed you how he stored that money, and he remembered how he stored his money. And his brother corroborated that, because his brother saw the money. Didn't handle the money? No, but he saw the money. And then on cross-examination, he was asked to show all of you how he stored those 1250s. And he showed it direct, and he showed it again for Mr. Hirschorn. Maybe it was funny, once again, when Mr. Palms sat here, and he was animated, and he was animated, held up the wallet, and he shook it. And what fell out? A pair of metal tweezers. And what did, and Mr. Hirschorn, rightly so, pointed out, something fell out. Yeah, my tweezers, my metal tweezers. But the money didn't, and that's what he said. The money didn't fall out. And did you hear any testimony about a wallet being shaken up and down? No, because a wallet wasn't shaken up and down. That's not how the money disappeared. Getting back to the defendant. Denzel Suitt, Officer Suitt, may come to court before you dressed in his civilian clothes, looking like an ordinary person. But on the night of March 24th, 2018, he wasn't dressed like that. He wasn't dressed in his khaki pants and his button-down shirt. He had his police uniform, his badge, his belt, his gun, his cuffs, his radio, his marked car, and his partner. And he wants you to believe that while acting with all of that visible authority to serve and having taken the oath to serve and protect the public, he would have you believe that in performing those duties, he happened to come across these two men in their car. His partner thought they could be homeless because they looked a mess, right? That they saw the alcohol, they saw that it was illegally parked, and there was no valid driver's license, although Osorio did not know that there was no valid driver's license, right? Which gets me to, you cut him a break. If your job is to serve and protect the people of Jersey City, the people of Hudson County, and you come across a car with two grown men who are clearly doing something, have open bottles in their car, and don't have a valid driver's license, are you serving and protecting the public by giving them a break? You're going to let what to you looks like an unlicensed driver who might or might not have been drinking go back out on the public streets? Is that serving and protecting the public? Does that sound like somebody who respects the oath of office that he took? Because if he did do that, if he did give them a break like that, then he was endangering the very public that he was sworn in to serve and protect. We know that he didn't give them a break because he and his partner were so busy in the South District. You saw the event log. There were 5 events in that log. And Officer Osorio defined each one. You see right there? That car right there, that's Denzel Suitt's marked patrol car on its way through the park to Bayside Terrace. And that's his event log that his partner filled out. They didn't have a busy night in the South District. There was nothing going on in the South District. So, did they give him a break just because? No. Use your common sense. There was no break here. It doesn't make sense, ladies and gentlemen. That version of events makes 0 sense. Use your common sense. Do not deny your analytical logic in this case. Unlike what Denzel Suitt would have you believe, Jermaine Palms' story makes sense. Jermaine Palms has documentation and witnesses who all corroborate his story. He got $600 in 50s from his Aunt Diane in East Orange. His aunt came in here, she told you about the 2 promissory notes. She told you she's 73 years old and retired and doesn't have the greatest memory, but she knows the promissory notes were made in this case. Not because she didn't trust her nephew to pay her back, but because she wanted to hold him accountable. Because $600 is a lot of money. Maybe not to all of you, but it's a lot of money to Aunt Diane, and it's certainly a lot of money to Jermaine Palms. Could she recall why she had done made them fill out 2 promissory notes? Not really. But does it matter? The fact is she had them write out 2 promissory notes saying that they were going to pay her back the money. That's what matters. The money is real, the loan was real, and she was paid back, and that is fact. Why, you may ask yourselves, would Denzel Suitt, a police officer, steal $600 from a man like Jermaine Palms? It's a good question. Why would he think he could get away with that? Just like he made Jermaine Palms and Denzel Suitt get out of the car that night and perform things that were inconsistent with police protocol, he did it because he could, ladies and gentlemen. He did it because he could. He was the one with the badge. He was the one with all of the accoutrement, the uniform and everything else they get to carry with them. And Jermaine Palms was what you saw in this courtroom. It's because he could. Who was gonna believe Jermaine Palms? It was a good bet that he wouldn't tell, right? He was already committing a few infractions in that car. He had a criminal history. He was in Greenville. Who's gonna believe Jermaine Palms? Well, up until Jermaine Palms got to internal affairs, nobody believed him. Nobody would give him the time of day. In order to decide this case, you're gonna have to consider all of the testimonial evidence and all of the circumstantial evidence. And absolutely, I'm gonna tell you to look at the circumstantial evidence, and I'm gonna refer you to that example that the judge is gonna give you about the snowfall. Absolutely, I'm gonna do that. I should do that. It's my duty to do that, because circumstantial evidence is evidence. And it's here. This case is full of it. And the judge is going to tell you that circumstantial evidence is no less or no more valuable than direct evidence. Equally valuable. Circumstantial evidence would be the testimony that Jermaine Palms told you and his brother told you that they had seen the money, that the money was in the wallet, it had been seen in the wallet went into the zipper pocket of the pants he was wearing that night, and the next time that wallet came out was when Denzel Suitt was handling that wallet. The type of logic and analysis that you all need to do in this case, when you go back into the jury room, requires your common sense. Denzel Suitt was acting as a police officer on the night of March 24th, 2018, when he unlawfully took $600 out of Jermaine Palms' wallet without permission. It did not belong to him. He had no right to take it. And he also had no intention to give it back. The judge is going to explain reasonable doubt to you. He will tell you that nothing in this world can ever be certain, can never be known to a certainty. At the beginning of the trial, I believe in Mr. Hirschorn's opening, he mentioned that reasonable doubt is beyond any doubt. That's not the standard. The judge is going to read you the standard for reasonable doubt. Guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is not proof beyond every single doubt. It is proof which leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. Look at the evidence in this case, ladies and gentlemen. You have all of these in evidence. They're like pieces of a puzzle, right? You need to look at the pictures. If you need to look at the videos, they'll be out here. You don't get them in the back. If you want to see the videos, ask to see the videos. We can arrange for that. Listen to the calls. Everything is here for you to use and for you to analyze and look at. You need to look at all of the evidence and not treat Jermaine Palms the way that he was treated by the South District that night. When you consider all of the evidence that I have presented to you for the last 7 days, well, not really 7 days, working week, right? You can't look at them and all these facts and coincidences in a vacuum. Coincidences are not meant to be looked at in a vacuum. At a certain point, they begin to add up and they serve as a guide. I am here to submit to you that the overwhelming list of coincidences in the form of circumstantial evidence, direct evidence, testimonial evidence, and physical evidence will guide you to find that Denzel Suitt violated his oath of office while he was working that night when he stole $600 out of Jermaine Palms' wallet. Thought he could get away with it. I am convinced that after you have looked at all of this evidence and considered the testimony and the demeanor of the witnesses, biases, motivations, you will find that Denzel Suitt is guilty of these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. And before I finish, I want to thank you for all of your time and your patience and the consideration that this case and Mr. Palms deserve. Thank you.